Hello and welcome to this webinar on net zero, warm homes and green jobs. Tonight we will be exploring the role of home retrofit in reaching net zero emissions. Now, reducing our need for energy is one of the best ways in which we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we're doing a really good job in decarbonising our electricity supply, such that now most of our emissions are generated by space heating, i.e. heating our homes and indoor spaces, alongside transport. So decarbonising our electricity supply, however, is easy peasy compared to decarbonising the way we heat our homes. But if we reduce our energy demand in the first place, then this is a significant contribution towards meeting net zero. And we can do this by increasing the energy efficiency of existing buildings through retrofits, which is why we're talking about that subject today. Not only will retrofits and energy efficiency save energy on emissions, but also create warmer homes, healthier living spaces, and save on bills. So it's win-win all around. What's the problem? Well, we will be exploring some of the issues that are coming up in this meeting, and we have four very knowledgeable speakers. So let's get going. Liz is our first speaker. So Liz Reason is the chair of the Green Party Executive. She's also chair of the South Hill Community Energy Company, which runs a 4.5 megawatt solar farm near Charlbury in Oxfordshire. And she has a professional background in strategy and policy development for a low carbon built environment. Liz, over to you.
Gosh, you found that. That feels like history these days. That's what I used to do when I was still in paid employment, actually. But yeah, so for 10 years, I was interested in energy and buildings. And for many years before that, I worked in energy policy and energy markets and all kinds of things. And then finally, energy and buildings, where I learned, sadly, that there are lots and lots of problems with our buildings industry. So I am going to start with the bad news, because too many people, including Green Party politicians, airily say, we're going to insulate 1 million homes, we're going to install 1 million heat pumps. And it just isn't that simple. Now then, I'm afraid that's Grenfell, which is horrible and disastrous and nothing like the homes that we all live in. And pictured next to the burnt out tower is Dame Judith Hackett. And she is a trained engineer who has many years experience both in engineering but also in regulation, and I believe that she chaired the Health and Safety Executive for 10 years. So when the Grenfell disaster happened, she was invited to make an initial inquiry into the safety issues related to Grenfell. And she was shocked at what she found. And that's all I'm going to share with you tonight, is what Dame Judith Hackett wrote in the foreword of her final report. In her interim report, she said, I have been shocked by some of the practices I have heard about, and I'm convinced of the need for a new intelligent system of regulation and enforcement. And I can tell you, actually, I wrote to Sian Berry, who was a London Assembly member, the day after Grenfell happened, with an email which said, here are 13 reasons why this happened. Because I'd spent 10 years understanding how the buildings industry works in relation to energy and carbon and retrofit and new homes. And I'm afraid, you know, for all that we are being told about the issues related to Grenfell, they are systemic in the industry itself. So if you can move on, please, Francis. So this is what she wrote: Building a Safer Future, an independent review of building regulations and fire safety. So she was able to publish this in 2018. So she was not consulting with the residents and all the stuff that is going on at the moment. So she was able to produce her work much more quickly. So next, she identified a series of systemic failures. Honestly, I would say she was just gobsmacked. She said, this is what I learned about the industry. Its chief characteristics: indifference. That's shocking, isn't it? They didn't care. Indifferent to the outcomes that they were working towards. So she gave us 3 additional reasons. The primary motivation is to do things as quickly and cheaply as possible, rather than to deliver quality homes which are safe for people to live in. And it's not just safety, it's also comfortable, warm in winter, cool in summer, good air quality. These are all things which we can substitute for safe, because the issues are exactly the same. She also said, when concerns are raised by others involved in building work or by residents, they are often ignored. And finally, some of those undertaking building work fail to prioritise safety, using the ambiguity of regulations and guidance to game the system. Now, that was only the first of her big points. And then she said the industry is ignorant. It doesn't even understand what it is supposed to be delivering. The industry isn't interested in outcomes other than delivering something to the cheapest price. It is not interested in delivering a building that performs as building regulations say it should. So after ignorance, she said, regulations and guidance are not always read by those who need to. And when they do, the guidance is misunderstood and misinterpreted. And the poor architect at Grenfell was stood in the dock, and they said, did you read the fire regulations? And he said, no, I'm afraid I didn't. They didn't know what they were supposed to be doing, but they had offered a very, very cheap price to Kensington Council. And next, she said, lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities. There is ambiguity over where responsibility lies, exacerbated by a level of fragmentation within the industry and precluding robust ownership of accountability. Now, there were some low energy homes built in Hanborough, or maybe not Hanborough, just before Hanborough, right next to the Blenheim estate, by an Oxford building company. And one of the directors went to Germany and he watched passive house homes being built in Germany. And he said, I looked on in wonder, because I saw the building arise in 3 weeks with 6 people delivering it. And I came home and I watched the own process going on in Hanborough. And what did I see? I saw 15 blokes, each in their own white van, none of them talking to one another while they ate their sandwiches and had a coffee. We don't deliver buildings as a team in this country. Everybody does their own thing. So how can you expect to get a good outcome? And then she said, there is inadequate regulatory oversight and enforcement tools, followed up with, next one, the size or complexity of project does not seem to inform the way in which it is overseen by the regulator. And again, the poor building control officer at Kensington Council had so many projects. They had cut his team from something like 12 to 2. How could he possibly do it? Building control has also been privatised in this country. So sometimes you've got local authority oversight, sometimes it's done through privatised building control. And quite honestly, with privatised building control, it may be that you don't get the quality of control that you're looking for unless you're paying for the person who's doing it for you. So in summary, where enforcement is necessary, it is often not pursued. And then, you know, if it were pursued, what are the penalties? They don't care. So rarely are there any penalties for poor workmanship that, you know, nothing changes. So in summary, she said, the above issues have helped to create a cultural issue across the sector, which can be described as a race to the bottom, caused either through ignorance, indifference, or because the system does not facilitate good practice, and there is insufficient focus on delivering the best quality building possible in order to ensure that residents are safe and feel safe. So, we have got a building sector that is broken. And we've got, Geordie is going to talk to us about how Cozy Homes is trying to do things in a better way and find people who are interested in producing better outcomes. And Gavin has been studying this problem for a long time. And I think my last slide, Francis, please. What needs to be done? We need a huge skills programme. We do not need £5,000 grants to do, put in an air source heat pump. That I just go on loads of webinars, even now, and when people say, we'll install 1 million heat pumps, I say, the heat pump is not the solution. Heat pumps produce low temperature heat. If you put low temperature heat into a leaky building, guess what? It doesn't get warm, and you keep pumping it up, so your bills go up, but you've achieved nothing. Unless you deal with the fabric of the building first, you shouldn't be installing heat pumps. So it's a huge skills program is what we need. And in their own small way, Cozy Homes is starting to develop that. And Gavin's got some ideas for what more might be done. I'll end there. Sorry to be the depressing one, but I think people need to know.
Thank you, Liz. People definitely need to know, and it's thank you for your excellent overview there. That's very sobering, but it is realistic. That is the world in which we are living. Okay, let's move on to Geordie. Geordie Stewart is a skilled construction and project manager with over 25 years of international experience. He's passionate about sustainable and energy efficient solutions in the built environment. And he's a trained retrofit coordinator, and he manages the Cozy Homes Oxfordshire team based in Charlbury, Oxfordshire. Over to you, Geordie.
Thanks very much, Helen. Good evening, everybody. I do have a lot of slides to get through, so I'm just going to whiz through, but none of them you need to read. It's just sort of visual. It's just a visual really sort of thing. So I'm just going to go through, what we do, what Cozy Homes is all about. Some of you already know, I appreciate, but I'm just going to whiz through that. Then I'll have a bit of a chat about some of the challenges we've faced. We're coming towards the end of our 2-year BASE funded grant for the scheme, and we'll be continuing beyond that. It's just, but it was a pilot scheme, and I'll discuss some of those challenges. I then want to just talk about sort of how some of the data we use currently, how it could potentially be used across the county in various different ways. And then I'll just quickly touch on the national retrofit strategy at the end. So Cozy Homes, I mean, our aims are sort of very different from what Liz has been describing. We basically want to remove the stress from your retrofit. We want to reduce your carbon emissions. We want to lower your energy bills, create a comfortable, healthy home, and improve your home's EPC. And we do that by following this client journey. It begins with an online web form that anybody can fill in, where you give some details about yourself, your property, maybe your aspirations. And we then book in a home assessment. We send in a retrofit assessor who will go in and typically spend an hour in your home measuring everything up. That information gets sent to us, and we assign a qualified retrofit coordinator who will draw up a whole house plan for you. So the whole house plan is really like a midterm strategy. Its aim is to give you all the information you need to make the decisions you need to get your home as close to carbon neutral as possible. All being well, you'll sign the client service agreement, which basically just sets the path for the following steps. We'll produce a building performance specification, which is a technical document which sort of details the work that you've agreed to do. We send that to our trusted contractors. All the contractors we deal with, we go through quite a rigorous vetting process. We ask them to join our Retrofit cooperative. Retrofit Works is a non-for-personal profit co-op. All the contractors are sort of members of the co-op, and any sort of profit goes back into the co-op. And its main emphasis is to, I mean, obviously retrofit, but it's everybody's values are about addressing the climate emergency at the end of the day. Contracts are then agreed. It's a competitive tender. It's so you the client chooses which client to go ahead with. Works proceed and ultimately signed off by the retrofit coordinator. But the entire process from start to beginning, importantly, is overseen and quality assured by a qualified retrofit coordinator. So we're basically de-risking the whole project for you and basically holding your hand through the whole process. I'm just going to give you a few snapshots of what the whole house plan looks like, so this is just a few extracts from the pages. So we give you our software, we'll be able to give you a snapshot of where you are now in terms of your energy use, your bills, and your carbon emissions. And this is broken down into the different elements of your house, the different fabric elements, the drafts, the hot water, etc., etc. This next graph shows you what the potential is. If you were to carry out the full recommended retrofits, this is before and after where you could get to in terms of your energy rating, your bills, and your carbon. And then finally, we normally would then package this into phases. There's not everybody can carry out a deep retrofit straight away, so we might want to phase it into different chunks. It can help financially, it can help with disruption as well. Amongst our team, we now have some very good retrofit designers, so we are able to sort of specify in detail the materials, and we look for avoiding sort of thermal coal bridges and things like that. We tend to specify natural materials where there's no VOCs, off-gassing. They're healthy for the building, they're healthy for you, and they have a very low embodied energy. And importantly, our whole scheme is really built around the new PAS 2035 standard. And the standard is all about the whole house approach, the fabric first methodology, and importantly, the role of the retrofit coordinator throughout the process. This document was put together partly after the Every Home Counts report. There was sort of look back at 10 years of retrofit and what had gone wrong. And this standard is really to address all that, learn from all the mistakes of the past, and sets out a way to do things properly. So on to some of the challenges. This is what we call the funnel of death. Since the scheme started, we've dealt with over 500 inquiries, and so that's the top of the funnel there. And I was just looking at the stats. This is based on our actual, the stats that we've got, and I was just looking at them last night. So only half of those people actually sign up to that we'll have spoken to them, we'll have corresponded by email, but only about half of those people will actually sign up for a whole house plan. We then, as explained, we go through the process, produce the whole house plan. That's a report that you don't have to continue with us. You could go to your own contractor and do, but at least you have that information. You know what the potential is for your home. Only 12% of the overall clients so far will actually ask to go to the next stage and have the client service agreement. But only half of those, around 6%, will actually sign the agreement and ask us to produce the building performance specification and go to tender. And then there's even a smaller proportion that actually ask us to sort of go and send quotes to contractors. Now, everything above the red line, we actually do technically at cost, but actually it's at a slight loss. It's slightly subsidized, and we're about to lose that subsidy. So as a financial model, it's not great. There's so much resource, time, energy, paying all our coordinators and our assessors, all of that to end up with that little slither at the bottom. So we're looking at that now, seeing how, because we weren't set up to be sort of a whole house plan production factory sort of thing. It's a great product in itself as a standalone, but it's not going to get the nation retrofitted. It's not going to reduce our carbon emissions by having it sitting on the mantelpiece. So we're trying to now sort of focus on how can we find out in advance before we go too far down the funnel, which people are actually interested in pursuing, and actually what are the barriers? Why are people not going ahead? And we do a lot of reach out, a lot of research. The Low Carbon Hub have been integral in this, and I would say initially when we started the scheme, we were still finding our feet, and it was really difficult to match sort of capacity with demand, and we often ended up with bottlenecks where we were under-resourced. And so we dealt with that. We've paid for training, we've trained up new retrofit coordinators, and then we sort of come across the next problem where we didn't have enough designers. So we've got now some excellent designers now helping us with the performance specifications. Then really it was the supply chain that was really stopped things moving. So we just couldn't attract enough contractors to the scheme, because the contractors, it was the chicken and egg problem. We contractors weren't interested unless we had sort of clients to give them work, and clients weren't interested unless we could assure them that we had contractors ready. So it's been a very sort of slow sort of, and I really have to thank all the people that have been involved in the scheme for their patience, because we now do, I'm really happy to say that we do have contractors that cover all the things that we specify now. So it's taken a long time to build up, and I'm really happy with the type of contractors we have, and it's been really kind of, I had some really good conversations with contractors recently that really want to learn more about the materials we use, and that they themselves are really interested in what we're doing and believe in it and wanted to do this as norm, as standard, not just as a specialist thing. Some other things came in. I don't know if we touched on the Green Homes Grant yet. So Green Homes Grant, fantastic. What happened is we got an absolute deluge of inquiries when it was released. We knew it was coming. We tried to sort of get prepared, but nonetheless, we got so many inquiries, we had to actually set up a waiting list and put people on hold and prevent people from paying. I didn't want people to pay, and then we weren't able to meet their demands. So there's we've still got sort of almost 50 people on the waiting list. And it wasn't just our own internal resources. What that also meant that there was a lot of our contractors that were able to provide Green Homes Grant work. They themselves got completely inundated, and they've they stopped taking their numbers and off their websites and stopped taking inquiries. And there's a number of contractors that we've spent some time building a relationship with, and then they're just not available anymore. And interestingly, there's sort of a lot of contractors now are actually deregistering from the scheme, because they've done so many quotes and submitted so many vouchers, but none of them have been returned yet. And it's kind of, yeah, it's been quite a ruin for them. So that's been another challenge. And amongst all this, as you know, we've been dealing with COVID. So we put in some really robust health and safety measures, and we do a risk analysis of all our clients before we enter their homes. So it's, some people obviously don't want people in the homes, others are okay, but it has definitely slowed things down. So that aside, I want to just chat briefly about retrofitting itself. It's never straightforward. Building new houses is easy in comparison. And I just wanted to use this as an example. So above this ceiling, is a client that we're about to do a very deep retrofit. It's a 2-story flat. It's a complete gutting and reinstall, and it's a fantastic job. Now, before we even set foot in the property, just before Christmas, the client had a leak, and this leak, unfortunately, made this hole in the neighbour's flat below. So we were offered to go in and do a quick fix. It was just coming up to Christmas. We'll say, well, we'll just patch it up, and then we'll come back and sort it out. So we opened up the floorboards from above. Every single joist was completely rotten. We got a structural engineer in. We were surprised this bathroom floor above had even remained standing. The wall plate, the joist, you can see the steel beam down there above that window. That was a complete just rotten piece of, I don't know, dust really underneath there. And so we had to literally rip the entire floor out, put all these new beams in, joists in, re-floorboard, re-plasterboard, skim. And we managed to do this in 2 weeks before, literally the day before Christmas. And and this is before we've even started our actual retrofit. And you imagine this room below is the neighbour, that's their living room, and suddenly this is opened up above them. So it was a bit of a shock for them. So I'm just saying, our housing stock is very old. You just don't know what you're going to expect, and it's never straightforward. So it's just the sort of the things we have to deal with. Okay. There's lots of barriers. Before I just on the barriers, there's lots of things I could have talked about, and some of the other reasons why people don't sort of carry on is really sort of finance. I myself would love. I know what I want to do to my house. I don't have the finance to do it. And it's also disruptive. That one I just showed you, the client had already agreed to move out while we do the retrofit, but not everybody can do that. And that's why we sometimes have to package things into phases. So there are lots of practical and financial reasons why there's barriers to retrofit. Data. This data is behind, this software is behind our whole house plans. This is West Oxfordshire. We can look here at the high, the carbon intensity. We can look at SAP profiles. We look at age bands. We look at built forms. We look at wall types. We can look at glazing. We can look at heating. We look at heating, fuel, and we can use this data at a county level, at a community level, at a street by street level. So we actually use this data from our software to target where do we need to, which homes do we need to deal with first. So I just wanted to sort of say that is something that we have the sort of tools to do that. And then finally, I just wanted to mention the national retrofit strategy, which is being under consultation at the moment, and it actually matches what we're doing. It's about building renovation plans, which is effectively the same as our whole house plan, skills and training, so training retrofit coordinators and training contractors, and then a delivery program. And it's recommending a sort of a community-based, bottom-up programs where and sort of enhancing the supply chain and in the local areas, which again is what we're focusing on. It goes on performance standards, finance, training, materials, creating customer demand, and there's like a 20-year plan up to 2040, but I won't go into that detail. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geordie. Move on to our next speaker, who is Gavin Killip. Gavin Killip is a researcher at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute. He carries out research on the construction industry in relation to climate policy targets. And he's currently involved in construction sector debates about the green recovery post-COVID, as well as doing evaluations with BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, on the retrofit supply chain pilots, which include Cozy Homes Oxfordshire.
I'm Gavin Killip from the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford, and I want to talk particularly about scale and quality. And I'm going to suggest that the way to do it is a model called market transformation, which sounds great, but it's you know, it's tricky, as Liz said, and as I'm also going to show. Before I do, let's just quickly recap the benefits of retrofit. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but the economic benefits are enormous in terms of the jobs, which will affect all regions because housing is everywhere. And actually another economic benefit is potentially it could increase labour productivity. Construction is a notoriously low productive sector, and by improving quality, we may improve productivity. It has the social benefits of improving health and well-being, and it would, if we did it at scale, eradicate fuel poverty. We know that it's important for reaching zero carbon targets. Actually, reducing demand as we look towards changing the energy system, reduced demand has all sorts of interesting benefits for the system itself. So things like reducing peak demand in winter evenings. A lot of that is domestic heating demand. And if we electrify all of heating, we're going to add enormous amounts of demand to an electricity system. So if we can do the retrofit, reduce the demand, we reduce the amount of extra wind turbines that we need to build for that peak. Market opportunities for retrofit. The UK has about 28 million homes. We spend something like 25 to 30 billion pounds every year on repair, maintenance and improvement. Every home, roughly, on average, spends about £1,000, £900,000. Not every year. Some years you spend nothing, and other years opportunities are in the multiple thousands of pounds. None of that is energy motivated. This is just the repair, maintenance and improvement market. I did a bit of an estimate, slightly crude methodology. Another colleague has done a similar estimate. We reckon about 40% of the total of repair, maintenance and improvement is a good opportunity for retrofit. Not necessarily whole home, but room by room or phased approaches are also possible. So something like £10 billion of spending every year is an opportunity for retrofit. The trouble is it's being missed rather than taken because of the design of how we've structured things. As Geordie alluded to, if we do retrofit alongside this RMI work, the repair, maintenance and improvement, it has two enormous benefits. It minimises the cost and it minimises the disruption because it makes them both marginal. And the marginal cost argument is effectively, if you're putting, let's say, solar panels on your roof and you do it at the same time as you're doing roof repairs because your roof has started to leak, then you only need to pay for the scaffolding once. So the cost of the solar shares the cost of the scaffolding with the roof repairs. That's the idea of marginal cost and marginal disruption. But the real key challenge for retrofit is how to make sure that these opportunities that exist are taken and not systematically missed, which is the case at the moment. They are being systematically missed. Okay, so my market transformation model, it's basically the same model that has been applied to fridges, light bulbs, washing machines over the past 25 years through the European Union. But the approach behind it is worth getting into in a little bit of detail. You need to understand the market that you're trying to transform first. And we don't do that. We, as Liz said earlier, people just blithely say, let's install 1 million heat pumps without understanding what that market really involves. Also, it's important to engage with the industry that you seek to transform. You can't just put them out of business. You've got to take them with you. Once you've done that, some intelligence needs to be applied to setting the industry targets which are both stretching and sort of achievable. And for retrofit, I would argue that's two kinds of target: minimum energy standards, but also minimum occupational standards, the standards for the workforce, which brings in a bit of what Geordie was saying about PAS 2035. That's a small step in the right direction. You increase the targets over time and you actually announce to the industry that those targets are going to be stretched. Massively increase the compliance checking, completely reorganize vocational education and training. It's not just a question of 1 or 2 courses, it's a structural problem in the training sector. But then you also need to, at some stage, ban the rental or sale of property by EPC band. There has to be some regulatory backstop that forces people to do this. And you need financial incentives of various kinds. And there are examples in other countries where they do this better than us, with 0 interest loans and all sorts of interesting packages. What you're trying to achieve is that 3-legged stool. And the 3-legged stool famously only stands if it has all 3 legs. And I'm arguing that quality, which is what we need for retrofit, is achieved through a combination of training, accreditation, and compliance with all of these different standards. And all of those legs are broken, as Liz said, unfortunately. The first market reality we have to face up is that construction operates in a low skills equilibrium. Just putting on a training course is not going to create a demand for high skilled work, because it currently works in a system where you have poor wages, poor security of work, low skills, no demand for additional skills, and the cycle goes round in a circle, perpetuating itself. Breaking out of that vicious circle is not going to be easy. The second market reality we have to face up to is the rise of self-certification. Going back to I think it was 2006, the government first allowed Windows installers to certify their own work as compliant. And that basically opened the floodgates. They had realized that there wasn't enough capacity in local authority building control to cope with what was happening. And so they allowed installers to certify their own work as good quality. They have since introduced a sort of umbrella body with Trustmark. And Trustmark basically doesn't do anything except allow other people to have self-certification schemes. And anyone can propose a scheme. Retrofit Works has actually got its own scheme for retrofit. I'm not saying that they're all poor quality, some of them are probably very good, but there are currently 39 consumer-facing schemes of various kinds, supposedly offering consumers some kind of quality assurance. Consumer and installer confusion is rife. No one really knows which one does what. But fundamentally, self-certification is a conflict of interest. If I install something and then fill in a form to say that what I've done is good, it's a clear conflict of interest. The final thing, which I would argue is broken, is the compliance checking. And again, Liz has mentioned Grenfell Tower here. Local building control are inadequately resourced. There are not enough people. They will suffer from low morale. The function of a building control officer is open to competition from the private sector. And here you find that developers will pay a private inspector to certify their project as being compliant. So again, there's a conflict of interest here. And we used to think that building control only really cared about two things. There was a study in the mid-2000s that showed that really people will only refuse to certify a building as compliant for two things: fire safety and structural safety. Energy was never ever a cause for sanctions. But actually, I would argue we've gone backwards even since then with Grenfell. That shows that actually we don't really even take fire safety seriously, with tragic loss of life. Okay, a possible way forward. I think we need to regulate the labour market. I think it's not going to be acceptable for retrofit for people to enter the market without having qualifications. And at the moment, anybody can set up in a firm tomorrow if they want to. We need to announce future minimum standards. We need to ultimately be banning the sale and rental of unfit homes, and that can be based on EPC bans. We know that the energy performance certificate is not brilliant, but it's there and we can reform it and make it better. I would argue we also need a national bank to provide finance and de-risk investment. There is a huge problem of not being able to pay for this stuff up front, but there are people who are willing to get into it if it can be de-risked. We need to introduce occupational standards for the construction industry, which currently doesn't exist at all. PAS 2035 is a small voluntary step. I'm talking about a mandatory measure across the board. We need to reform the training content because it's not good enough, it's poor quality. And we also need to change the governance of training because it works to short-term industry perceptions of need and not long-term societal need. Building control needs a lot of support and it needs to be looking much more at tighter compliance checking, greater resource there. And then going back to this natural retrofit strategy thing that Geordie talked about, I would argue we actually need a retrofit body set up, which will coordinate kind of a series of field trials where we do action research, doing real work on real buildings. We test new processes and practices. We integrate projects into things. We test how things can be made perhaps cheaper, done quicker, done more robustly. But it needs some kind of evaluation and analysis so that we're repeating a learning cycle. And we learn more and more about how to do this stuff better, quicker, and even cheaper. We need to use the lessons that we learn to tighten the standards over time. But none of that actually currently exists. But that's what I would say is what we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gavin. As our last speaker is Andrew Prosser. Andrew Prosser is a Green Party town councillor in Witney, and he runs his own sustainability consultancy, supporting businesses and local authorities to reduce carbon emissions. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Helen. And in this section, I'm basically going to summarise some of the things that are happening locally, particularly in West Oxfordshire, and leading into the next section and our discussion, talk about some of the things that probably do need to happen to bring things forward. Certainly, listening to those previous presentations, it's been a real reality check of where we are as an industry and how things are moving at the moment. I guess in a way, the positive thing is we have to do this. We know that we have to do this. This is one of the biggest areas where we can make an impact on carbon emissions. And we know we've got to move quickly over the next decade to do that. And I think the realization, if we keep pushing at this, the realization is dawning, and I guess for the industry, the market opportunity is there. There are so many buildings out there that need retrofitting and rebuilding, that opportunity is there. We just need to, and it's a big just, we just need to put in place the right infrastructure and support and provide the right signals. So, I mean, the government has actually said that they have an ambition for 2 million new jobs in the green skills jobs over the next decade. That's the ambition. Now, of course, that's rhetoric, but basically, we need to make sure that that is followed through. Whatever happens at the national level, and at least there are some sort of more positive signs than there were a few years ago. What we can do is at the local authority, at the local level, is try our best to provide the right signals to the sector, and to do what we can with our communities and the funding that we can get hold of to move this forward. And locally, I mean, I used to do project work in terms of environmental technology through regional development agencies many years ago, helping move new environmental technologies to market and into the sector, and working with SMEs. Nowadays, that local role of business support and the funding comes through the local enterprise partnership, and they're the key, probably the key player here, because they have the money from national government, and they do have some schemes that they're doing, and basically the Cozy Homes, Geordie's the Green Homes Grant and that project, that's also been linked through from funding and work that the local enterprise partnership has been sponsoring. One thing that they are doing within the region is they have set up a new construction skills centre, or it's being set up in Bicester, and as part of Abingdon and Witney College, and it's supposed to be starting in the autumn. Abingdon and Witney College are going to be starting up a green skills hub to give specialist support and training to help people pick up the skills in this area. So that's one good thing that is coming through. But the other things we need to do really around local authorities, one big opportunity is local authorities and large companies as well are actually declaring net zero strategies. They are reacting to the climate emergency, not fast enough for our liking, but they are moving on this. And I think in terms of the right signals, and certainly within Witney Town Council, we've been lobbying the District Council to prioritise funding and support and actions for the retrofit of the existing housing stock. And there are some good things coming out, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. The other sort of area of support in terms of getting people's skills and training, of course, the business support networks. The local authorities have a role to play in that, in their communications and their support. But we need to get the local business support networks involved, and we need to get the institutes. One example is because of the nightmare of Brexit of late, in terms of imports and exports and customs and excise duties that are now coming in, the Institute of Logistics has been running lots of training courses, trying desperately to get people up to skill level and understanding of what they need to do. And as many of you are probably aware, that this is a tough battle. But that's the kind of thing we need to be doing with the institutes and sort of master builders, as well as getting them engaged and involved in helping them to train, particularly where it's self-employed and trades, to get people trained up in the new green skills that they need. The next area around local authorities, as Gavin has mentioned, there is in terms of the planning system itself, what we can do. We know for new build houses, there is development control, and that's under-resourced. But what we can do on local town and parish councils, we can keep asking the questions of planning applications, whether it's new conservatory conversions that are coming through the system. We can keep asking the questions of what steps are being, and with new guidelines, what steps are being taken to improve the efficiency of those buildings in which they take place. Now, building regs do specify requirements, and my recent experience with building control in Witney has actually been quite good in terms of them following up what needs to take place in terms of energy improvements around the conversion that we had. Where it was more difficult was with the actual contractors who were working on the project. One of the challenges is in Oxfordshire particularly, is there are so many new developments going up, so many new houses going up, that a lot of the skilled workforce is being pulled into those new housing developments, because the big housing developers have subcontracted and fragmented out their building suppliers. So a lot of skill, there is a lot of skill and expertise there, but a lot of that gets pulled into the new house development. So that's one of the challenges is to try and the kind of work that Geordie's doing is to try and build that supply chain in terms of the retrofit sector as well. Next slide, please. And sorry, just going on about the national housing developers, one thing we can do is we can try and push them to invest in, because I mentioned the kind of suppliers and contractors who are working on new developments are also sometimes the contractors for retrofit. We can push those housing developers, some of them who say they are invested in global supply in terms of supply chain training. We can try and push them much harder to invest in the skills and training of their supply chains who will feed into retrofits as well. So in terms of what happens next, we really need to, of course, we need to lobby hard to get sufficient funds coming through to local authorities, to local programs, skills training and support. That's something we have to keep up with, and we can do that locally as well, ensuring that our local authorities are prioritising the retrofit market. Part of that is communication as well. Geordie showed the sort of house street by street data on houses that need doing this. We need that kind of big effort, that program of work within our towns, within our cities and villages. We need to make the community aware of that we really need to move quickly on this, and we need to work with the community to do that. The other thing is moving particularly younger people and people in their mid-careers into the learning these new skills. I mean, if we look at other sectors as well, so the automotive sector, we know that over the next 10 years, diesel and petrol cars are being phased out. And if you think of the impact or the number of garages servicing cars at the moment and the skills that are based on servicing internal combustion engines, they've got to be reskilled into dealing with electric vehicles and battery vehicles. That's the same kind of challenge we've got on green skills for building as well. It's a big challenge, but you know, it can be done. It shouldn't be rocket science. It is complex, but it shouldn't be rocket science all the way through. The other thing around the net zero strategies that local authorities have in place. And this is one good idea, that West Oxfordshire District Council have a net zero climate plan. At the moment, they're only focused on the emissions that they control within their operations. So the buildings that the district council owns and the fleets that they operate. But they are aware, and we're trying to push them to look more at their impacts in the wider community. One thing they are doing in terms of their net zero strategy, any carbon emissions that they can't reduce over the next decade, they are planning to offset. And one of the projects and investment schemes they're looking at is any residual emissions, the equivalent of that in financial terms is actually invested in retrofit of houses in terms of the housing stock. So that's one good idea that they've got to get more investment into the sector. We can also perhaps push that with larger companies nationally as well. Some of the leading ones have also put in place net zero strategies, and we need to push them to, instead of investing in offsets, international offsets, to invest in the wider sort of impact in terms of buildings that they can make in terms of retrofit as well for existing housing stock. So that's one of the ideas, and perhaps we can pick that up in the discussion to get more investment into the sector. But I think overall, as we've all experienced during the COVID crisis, we've been under pressure. Small businesses out there have been under pressure. Some companies have actually changed their business models virtually overnight to deal with the new situation. That's the kind of thing we need to do in terms of the retrofit sector. We need to push that, and as well as COVID heroes out there, we need to get green fit heroes in our communities as well, working together on this.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and thank you to all of our speakers. Can we just give like quiet claps to our speakers to say thank you very much before we move on to the question and answer session? Thank you. So I'm going to ask questions to a specific person, but speakers, if you'd like to also answer, just feel free to chip in. We've got some questions that are directed to specific people. We've also got questions or comments that actually all the speakers you can comment on. But I'm going to lead off with one from Liz. It was the very first question that was asked. And it says, do you think private sector construction businesses, which have been highly dependent on workers from Eastern Europe, are going to be the right kind of bodies to participate in investing long-term in people who will need better construction and people skills?
Well, investment in skills is not something that we have seen the industry particularly interested in doing. And where they do invest in skills, it tends to be more around the things that interest them rather than what is required of them. And I was rather down to see yet again that Bayes has announced another scheme which is going to be industry-led for apprenticeships and so on. And, you know, we know what the industry is interested in, and it's as described by Dame Judith Hackett. They're not interested in teaching skills for low energy, low carbon buildings, unless something has changed in the 3 years since I last helped Bayes look at this. I don't think there's an easy answer around skills, and I think maybe Gavin's got better ideas. We probably need to fund training and require it of people. And also something I feel is so important is that we need better informed clients who demand better performance and better outcomes. But, you know, we don't know about it enough to ask for the right things.
Okay, I'll move on to another question unless, yeah, Gavin,
no,
please
let Gavin answer, please. Yeah.
I'll try and be brief. There was a sort of implicit thing in that question, I think, about the responsibility for investment in skills belonging at the level of individual firms. And that is currently where it lies. But I would argue that this is a much bigger problem than that. And we shouldn't be allowing the skills investment decision to lie with individual firms, which goes back to my idea about a license to trade or a labour market regulation. It should be that you have to have the qualification before you can set up in business. There was a discussion just now about MOT testing centres and shifting them from petrol to electric vehicles. We don't take our cars to be serviced by unqualified motor mechanics, but we do give our buildings over to people who are unqualified to fix the buildings. They have the practical skill to do the things that we ask for, but they don't have the technical understanding to do the energy work, and those are two very distinct things. I think it's a societal issue that we need to tackle the way that we do vocational training across the piece.
And I would actually go further than that to talk, it needs to go beyond training. So I'm going to pick up a question that was just put into the chat pane, which is, where does the leverage, like the power and interest exist to push for these kinds of changes that we've heard you recommend, we'll probably agree with them, but this is in a context that other people have commented in the chat pane saying, well, and as you just said, Gavin, the power and the interest lies in either the large profit making from the very big house builders, or just making as much money as possible. Arguably, it's in builders' interests to not build very high quality housing, because then it would lead on to repair work and so on. It's almost like an analogy with the move to electric vehicles that don't need as much maintenance. Existing car dealerships are not pushing electric vehicles because they don't get the money on the maintenance and the repair work. So where does the leverage lie? How can we try and implement the regulations that are and the changes that have been recommended? Anyone from any speaker, please speakers, can you unmute yourself? So feel free to just chip in.
I'm going to pitch in with something that's a bit more optimistic than the general tenor of what I've been saying. So I certainly at the moment, the leverage lies with the developers, who are listened to by government, and they win every time. So that's why we lost the zero carbon home standard that should have come in 2019. Developers said it would cost too much. Developing quality homes needn't cost very much more at all, provided you understand what you're doing. But there is another way in which leverage is coming about. And I had a conversation this morning with Ness Scott, who is the Climate Action Officer at West Oxfordshire District Council. And although they're only committing to being net zero on the emissions that they themselves control, they are trying to assist with change throughout the district. And one of the things they're going to do is to develop a carbon neutral toolkit, which is for developers and builders, both for retrofit and new homes. And they are beginning to apply the general principles of that carbon neutral toolkit to new developments already. So Salt Cross apparently is going to be meeting higher standards. And they also said once this carbon neutral toolkit has been developed, and they will be putting something out to tender. So this is going to be developed by consultants from June onwards, and they are employing very good consultants who know what they're doing. And they said that they will then feed those requirements into their planners, into building control, and the West Oxfordshire planners and building control will then be requiring and monitoring outcomes to those standards. So I think that is actually a very important piece of work that's being done here locally.
Can I add to that? So certainly what we've seen on the role that the planning process has to play, we've on the Witney Town Council, on the planning committee, for the last 18 months, every planning application that comes through, we've been pushing for better, even in town centres, better cycle parking infrastructure in houses. We've also been pushing for, related to flooding, more permeable surfaces going down instead of tarmacking and concrete. And we keep asking the question on, although we don't have the power, we keep asking the question, and we have seen through the planning process a change over that time. More plans are coming forward that take account of that from the start. So even just asking the question, the planners out there, the officers do know, most of them do get this stuff. and it's up to politicians to kind of keep pushing it and put that leverage on the planning system as well. And the same, I think it's a more difficult area, but I think the same can be done for retrofit as well.
Okay, well, a question to Gavin and Geordie on Cozy Homes Oxfordshire. So if Cozy Homes Oxfordshire was a pilot, are there other similar pilots happening? And Gavin, you mentioned that you're doing review work for Bays. So is the intention that Bays pick out best bits and then roll out something more substantial?
Yes, so Oxfordshire was one of 6 pilots. I think the others were London, East Sussex, Cornwall, Bristol, Manchester, from memory. I think the Cornwall one has now stopped. It's coming to an end, as Geordie said, and I've been advising some consultants who've been doing the evaluation of all 6 for Bays. I think Bays thought it was going to work well and quickly, and what they have found is that it's taking a lot longer than they thought to turn interest into any meaningful work, which is what Geordie showed with his funnel of death. And that's across the piece, that's not just in Oxfordshire. I also did a piece of work with some colleagues doing a review of international retrofit supply chains, so looking at practices in other countries. And there people systematically said you need strong policy support for at least 10 years to make this stuff happen. So I hear people talk about climate emergencies and we need to renovate the whole building stock in 10 years. I would say it's going to take a good 10 years to get the industry anywhere near ready to do this stuff. I don't like being the messenger with this message because it's really hard. It is too late. We're starting from such a low base. It's going to take a long time to get there. And other countries have got some ideas that we can maybe learn from, but they've also got some better starting points than we have. There was a question in the chat about Germany. And yes, as Liz said, they have got a better starting point, I would argue, regulatory, but also culturally in relation to looking at quality in their built environment sector. You can always find notable exceptions, but I'm talking about the generality of the market. We do have a low skills, low quality status quo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. And just to add, sorry, Helen. I mean, yes, there was also a question, why are we, one of the barriers is that, is the upfront cost. So from our KPIs, our scheme has been a failure because we haven't converted interest into physical retrofits. We've done very few physical retrofits, but we've developed over the last 18 months the systems and infrastructure that we've set in place and the relationships we've built and the people we've trained. I'm really proud of what we've achieved, and I'm really thankful for all the people that have been involved in this sort of in this pilot in terms of all our clients, because without them, you can't just say, plan this is how it's going to be, because until you've tested the market, you don't know what the response is going to be. So we've evolved according to the sort of the needs of the clients and how we approach contractors. We started off only charging £75 for the it was heavily subsidised, and it wasn't sustainable. So halfway through, we put it up to £175. That's still subsidised. It costs us more than that. Just we pay our retrofit coordinators more than that. We do not make any money. Hence, we're a failure from a business model. But when we doubled the price, the interest also doubled. That has not been a barrier. People are willing to pay that. It may just filter out people that maybe are window shopping, shall we say, to be to have a ruthless business head on. It's a real shame that the funding has stopped now, because we're having to make now some difficult decisions. We are going to continue, but we have no funding. So we're having to make some really difficult decisions on how we go ahead, moving forward. 18 months, 2 years is a very, very short space of time for any business startup. So that's the position we're in. We have agreed we're going to continue, but there may be some changes in how we go about it.
Yeah. Okay. And you say it's a failure, but so many of these things are done on very tightly defined cost accounting, like cost benefit assessments. So if you've changed someone's home so they are warmer, they have a healthier lifestyle, it improves their health, it puts less pressure on health services, that everything is interconnected, and yet our kind of costing model does not appreciate that. And when we talk about the market or the industry, we're talking about this lumped approach, but it's composed of many small to medium-sized businesses, micro businesses, lots of individual parts. I'm going to ask Ian if he'd like to say something, because Ian Cox has put in the comment that he'd like to give a supportive view from the supply chain side. So, Ian, would you like to speak for a minute?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Liz, Geordie and I met in the Rose and Crown for a high-level discussion about this some time ago, and I'm entirely supportive of what Geordie's been trying to do. But it's a cottage industry. That's the scale that we're operating at, and that is just not good enough from a country's perspective. And so if this is going to make any difference within a reasonable period of time to individuals and to the country as a whole, it's got to be done at scale. For it to be done at scale, people need to have more than just an offer of a bit of a grant that they might someday be able to secure from the government. Money's cheap at the moment. The government could afford to offer people who own their own home a zero interest loan for 10 or 20 years to spend on retrofitting their home to the standard that it should be at. And that would cost very little and do a lot very quickly. If people rent their home from a landlord, if it's a private landlord, they too could get an interest-free loan, provided they commission the work that needs to be done. And if people own their own home but don't have a mortgage, then clearly there's a loan that they could have against the value of their home that would pay for that work. So the money needs to be more readily available, such that that's the first of my four legs to my stool. The second one is that regulation has been and control has been hollowed out in this country. I'm so pleased that Liz started with Grenfell. When I started in the industry in the 70s, in London, there were district surveyors who were like sergeant majors in terms of the rigor of the investigation that they carried out on site into the quality of the work, the resources they had to assess the specification and so on. All of that's been whittled away, and that's not good enough, and government need to change that. The third thing is that the industry will only do what the industry is forced to do. The building regulations have been adversely affected and not driven forward in the way that they should have been, in a way that would force anybody who wants to do anything to a house, whether it's a new one or an existing one. The regulatory standards need to be aspirational and much more exacting. And then the fourth thing is about the supply side, and that is, in my view, that lots of individual builders and subcontractors and contractors work for volume house builders on large new residential developments, but they actually only do it for one reason. They get money, but they get their wage out of the fact they have continuity of work. If you were a contractor wanting to work for Geordie, could you offer them 2 years of work? No, not with any certainty. So the supply side needs the certainty of volume as well. Of course, the corollary of that is, if you want to play the game, you've got to be qualified to the standard, which is the point that Gavin made. So I think there are four things. One is about the funding will enable the scale. The scale will interest the market. The market will realize that they can only capitalize on that opportunity if they are trained and qualified to a level that's acceptable. And the regulation and policy side, which I think is probably, Liz, the most difficult because it's short-term politically driven, that actually the building regulations, there's huge amounts that could be done to the building regulations in short order that will make a big difference. And that's probably the most difficult one to drive, but it can be done, because surely from the country's point of view, if money's cheap and politicians of all parties like to be popular, then why not make some money available that would do a lot of people a lot of good things?
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank you very
Ian.
much,
I
Ian.
mean, can I just say, sorry, it's gone out of my head what I was going to say. It'll come back to me.
Gavin, I think you wanted to say something?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. Very, very succinct and on the money, I think. I just wanted to say two things. Wales and Scotland are both doing some interesting things better than England at the moment. So if West Oxfordshire is interested in, structural things that might change, have a look at the Better Homes, Better Wales, Better World plan, and look at what Scotland is doing around declarations of infrastructure and plans for local authorities having a greater role in deciding some of this stuff. Neither of them has got complete answers. I'm not saying they've, just take it off the shelf, but there are some interesting things going there.
Yeah, sorry, it's come back to me what I was going to say. There was an announcement yesterday that a new safety regulator has been set up by the government, and I think Dame Judith Hackett is going to be chairing it, but it's only about the products. I mean, clearly at Grenfell, the product, the insulation material, was a cheat, and it shouldn't have been used where it was. And that caused a lot of the problems related to the fire, but there were many, many other problems. So just tackling the product issue is only tackling, a 15th of the things that need to be done. And we do need government regulation. We do need government to understand they have to do something. And I am trying very hard to get our Green Party politicians to understand the scale of this problem and to take this on as a big issue, because Labour doesn't get it, the Tories don't get it, the Lib Dems don't get it. We do, because I keep telling them. And, I really think we could make some headway.
Keep persevering, Liz. Geordie, I think you want to speak, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to, thank you, Ian. I agree with everything you said. And I just, except the last thing, I probably could keep some builders busy for 2 years. My biggest problem at the moment is we've now got some really good general contractors that we've teamed up with, and we're really happy to be working with them. But they're all small businesses. They don't have admin teams. They're taking 4 weeks to return quotes, and then they're booked up till sort of April before we can even get them on our working for us, sort of thing. So you put all this effort into getting people on board, but actually they're still busy. They're all too busy to so it is a problem. And there's absolutely, our model, it can't. We've got to learn how can we upscale this. We're sort of rearranging the deck chairs, really, aren't we? I mean, we need to learn how we can do this at scale. But the pilot has been. I mean, we've learned so much, and hopefully this learning will sort of feed in and feed back. And Russell Smith, who's behind Retrofit Works, there was a question about the national retrofit strategy, so he's on the board of that. And he's going to meet the Minister for Business and Strategy next week about it. So it's got the Parliamentary Undersecretary, and it's got and also CEO of Times Tideway. So there's some influential people on the board of that, so it does carry some weight, and he is trying to push things through in up to number 10. Let's see where it gets on with that. Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of scaling, well, I agree with it looks like there really needs to be scaling up of what's done. One thing we do know, I think, and be interested in your views on this, Geordie, is even some of the more, what I would call the more basic things like loft insulation had slowed down massively in recent years because of the the drying up of perhaps grants and the sort of communication effort coming down from government, we can surely do things in the meantime which are in terms of loft, sort of things like loft insulation and even sort of better seals and so on around some of the drafty. There are some basic things we can do. Is that correct in the meantime? And we can get houses to do.
Right, so there's a number of things. I'm constantly surprised how many houses still don't have cavity fill, don't have a cavity insulation. I just kind of expected that all be done by now, but they're absolutely not. On the loft insulation, when there was the sort of all the eco grants and there was this sort of mass race to sort of these free loft insulation, all sounds great. So on paper you've got your loft insulated. Unfortunately, I don't think I've been in a house where I've assessed and I get all the photographs from all the assessments that have been done. A lot of these companies were just taking the bales of insulation up into the loft, not even unpacking them. And they've certainly not been fitted properly in terms of keeping ventilation open and things like that. So if you don't do something properly, I mean, it's nothing worse than redoing something that's been done badly, and you've got to go back and actually do it again, which is the labour costs more than the materials, and so it's really sad when you see things like that. But there are things that can be done, absolutely. Funnily enough, the small sort of handy person type jobs are often the hardest. They're the easiest to say, yes, you need this doing. We are trying to find people at that scale. I mean, big businesses aren't interested in that. It's too it's too faffy, it's too small. But we are working. Michael Hoot, who's our membership manager, he's working with people that have been put out of business, with COVID and everything, and who are looking for work, and to see if they can do some of these sort of smaller sort of handy person type jobs, like draft sealing, things like that. Yeah, so certainly that can be done in the meantime. Yeah, but it's not going to be enough to make a difference alone.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've nearly run out of time, so I just want to give the speakers one last opportunity to say very, very briefly a key point, or to emphasize something that's been said that they think is particularly important and relevant. So Gavin, would you like to lead on this, please?
Okay, my soundbite is going to be debates about housing in this country, both new build and retrofit, focus exclusively on quantity, how many of them need to be done, how quickly, and not sufficiently on quality.
Thank you, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Geordie?
Put me on the spot here. So I would like to offer, any, I didn't have time to go into sort of how we use data, but we really can use it to, if a community like something like Sustainable Charlbury were planning to do a housing stock analysis and seeing, okay, we've got this type of housing, we've got 100 of these houses and 100 of those houses. We'll see what can we do to that, and we'll take a proposal and see if would we get planning, take it to the community. Would you accept if we covered this house in insulation? What do you think? And take it like that. So we have the tools to do that, and so if anybody from a community group wants to look into that, then do please get in touch.
Thank you. Andrew?
I'd say let's really push the housing developers on this. They created these fragmented supply chains. Let's push them politically on this to invest in the sector.
Thank you. And Liz, you started, so you can finish. What's your soundbite?
Thank you very much. Well, we're planning a whole communications strategy and campaigning strategy around COP26. And one of the big issues that I think we should be pushing is housing quality rather than quantity, and find ways of embarrassing the government.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, the speakers and everybody in the audience. Please, let's all do our silent claps again, just to thank each other. And good night. That concludes our webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.